Hello, I'm Pablo Yanez. I'm a student from Universidad San Sebastián, and today I'm going to talk about applied linguistics. There is a discussion over teachers and whether they should be able to help students transition from academic language of the classroom into a more realistic street language when using L2, that is, speaking like native speakers. The What we're going to talk about today is divided in three parts. The first one is what is a native speaker? We're going to make a definition if that thing is possible. We're also going to view some theories, some approaches, some hypotheses made around L2 learning and acquisition. And we're going to see some differences between native speakers that are necessary to understand in order to see if it is possible to help students sound like natives and whether it is also worth it. First things first, what is a native speaker? A native speaker is, on the surface, someone who speaks a language as their L1. While that is a correct definition, however, it does it does little but other than scratch the surface. Native speakers are often not a monolithic entity. They have different genders, ages, they are from different places, they are from different times in history, and there is an issue when it comes to L2 learning and how to make it homologous to L1 acquisition, and that's the key. L1 was often acquired instead of learned. Not often, but actually always. It is acquired instead of learned. L2 is more often learned. And those are two very different things because acquisition is a natural process, whereas learning is a pursuit. Some theories, approaches, and hypotheses that we can talk about are the hypothesis, for example, of Chomsky's universal grammar. Universal grammar says that children are born with an innate knowledge and potential to be able to process language and then codify it and make it into something coherent that is within the rules. Then learned and then de-learn, you're going to relearn the language again. There is, however, a part of the context of language learning that Chomsky's universal grammar doesn't understand, which is the fact that, well, language is also a social process. Not only does it have to do with your ability, but also where you are when you start learning a language or when you start acquiring a language. If you have more exposure to the language and its culture, you're more likely to learn the language. However, if you have less exposure, you will learn less. There is also the issue of reinforcement. L1 acquisition often works with positive reinforcement, whereas L2 learning has to work with both positive and negative reinforcement. And L2 teachers need to find a balance between positive and negative reinforcement. We must correct the students. We must praise them when they do things right. However, we need to find a balance uh, to not be overzealous in our correction and also not praise them too much. There is therefore an issue that can be brought up by uh, excessive negative reinforcement and lack of positive reinforcement that is what Krashen refers to as language shyness. Language shyness is a phenomenon that consists of students basically giving up on learning an L2 due to overly harsh criticism that happens constantly as well. Basically, you have been shamed out of trying to learn a language. Some of the solutions that Krashen that a solution to language shyness could be what Krashen had talked about before, and a hypothesis that he had raised, that is the comprehension hypothesis, also known as comprehensive input, uh, which means that students should be exposed to an input that is just on the very next, the very higher level, just one level higher than the one they are stuck into, in order to go step by step in their learning process. We also have to consider the differences between native speakers. Native speakers, as I said before, vary in terms of age, gender, status, uh, the place in time in which they live, uh, the geographic location, etc. And as for that, when it comes to that, there is a change in what constitutes fashionable language, what constitutes slang, what constitutes what are the best ways of communicating depending on where you are, also formal or informal settings. Um, the the things, the things that are in style in 1980s England are not going to be the same words that are in style in 2010 United States. It is rather harsh, therefore, to keep. It is hard to keep up with the trends in the classroom because, as I said before, in an L2 classroom, you will have limited exposure to authentic material. So teachers, even though they have to try and keep up with the trends from the classroom, they should not be too overzealous about it, and they should have in mind that the possibilities will be quite limited. So, in conclusion, should teachers try and get students to speak the L2 naturally, as in they were in an English speaking country street? Yes and no. They should try to get the students to speak as organically as possible in order to be able to achieve proper communication. However, they must have in mind that not all students are able to produce all the sounds and that they are not able to imitate every accent whatsoever, because all accents are very different. As I said before, someone from Scotland, someone from Paisley will sound very different from someone from Glasgow, and someone from Glasgow will sound very different from uh, someone from London, and someone from London from someone from New York, uh, and so on. So yes, we should, as teachers to be, or in my case, or as people who are already teachers, we should try and get our students to uh, be as competent as possible. And yes, we should try to get them to properly communicate in every context. But we have to understand that they will not always reach native proficiency. And what matters, however, is proper communication. That's the end of my video. Please click on like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.